Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is you're listening. Welcome to episode 4 of the Franchise Edge podcast brought to you by Scorpion. I'm your host, Jamie Adams. And this week, I'm really honored to welcome a fantastic guest. His name is Ben Fox. Ben is the president of ProNexis. ProNexis is an interesting company. They are part of the 5-star franchising family of brands, but they are not a franchise. They're actually a service provider, a vendor for franchise businesses. And their mission at ProNexis is to transform the customer experience in home services through voice, chat, and instant booking. So this is an interesting podcast because, as I mentioned before, this podcast is really about sales and marketing and franchising. But I think that the Siamese twin of sales and marketing is customer experience. And ProNexis provides solutions that take advantage of the investments that franchise businesses make in marketing. So they are the company that will answer the phone when someone calls your business. So they'll respond to an online chat, or they'll help you facilitate an online booking or a scheduled appointment. And they're doing this for thousands of franchise locations, primarily in residential services. Ben he shares some really fantastic insights about the importance of great customer experience. They've done a lot of auditing of businesses to check the efficacy of how businesses are answering the phone calls from their website, how they're responding to forms online. They've done some really, really interesting research around the importance of online booking today. That's right. Even for plumbers and HVACs and pest control businesses, it's really important today and becoming more important that you actually have an online booking mechanism on your website to actually help a customer book an appointment online. And Ben shares some really interesting stats around that. We talk a little bit about AI and AI chat. It's a great episode. I hope you enjoy it. I bring you Mr. Ben Fox, or Captain Fun, as I believe he's called by his friends and colleagues. So Ben Fox, president of ProNexis. I hope you enjoy. Thanks a lot. Have a great one. Ben, welcome. Good seeing you.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Good to be here. Appreciate this.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited about this podcast. So this is a couple of first times been on the podcast. All right. So first time that I've had a male on the show, all right, believe it or not. And first time that I'm talking to someone whose expertise isn't necessarily in marketing, because this podcast is about primarily focused on sales and marketing in the franchise industry. But you're not a marketing guy. You are a customer experience guy.
Yeah.
And I always talk, and I'm talking to our customers and prospects and our sales team and our account management team. I think of marketing and customer experience as like Siamese twins, right? You can invest all the money in the world in marketing, but if you're not really ready to translate the investment you're making in marketing over to a great customer experience and take advantage of the leads that marketing is generating, then you're kind of burning dollars in a lot of ways, right?
For sure.
So, as the first guy on the podcast, and the first person that's really focused on customer experience, tell us about your role as president of ProNexis, and give us an overview, give the audience an overview of what ProNexis is and what you guys do there.
Yeah, well, I'm honored to represent the entire male race on the podcast. As the first, I hope I can live up to the legacy that men have to share. So anyway,
we're gonna make sure you do. We're gonna make sure
there you go. Make me look good. Yeah. So I'll get into kind of ProNexis, how it fits into 5-star, and then where the value that we contribute to our franchisees is. But stepping back, I think it's important to tell the origin story of ProNexis and 5-star franchising, because that's part of the whole story. And our founders, Scott Abbott, Chad Jones, they've been in the industry a long time. They started 5-star painting. It's 18, 19 years ago now. And in the founding days of that company, they went through, and Scott actually called 1,000 painters across North America. Canada and the US, went through the yellow pages, just started calling painting companies across multiple markets to get an understanding of what the competitive landscape looked like, pricing, how they approached the business, whatever that all looked like. The resounding theme was that nobody answered their phone. Crazy. He ended up only speaking to 25% of them. Wow. So you said marketing agency can do all in today's today's world, a marketing firm can produce all these leads, but if you do not answer the phone, if you don't have a good customer experience, then we're leaving money on the table. It's just a huge, huge miss. And of course, the customer journey and the landscape has all changed in the last 19 years drastically. Like Yellow Pages is no longer a thing, but customer experience is more important than ever. And so during that, kind of going back to the story, right out of the gate, they built a call center as part of 5-Star Painting because they knew, if we just answer the phone, we're going to be in the top 25% of the market.
Right.
So they did the investment, started investing in technology to manage that system. Back then they did homegrown everything. They built CRM, they built the technology for the call center. They really liked to invest in those sort of things at that phase of the company. Growth. 9 years later, they sell 5-Star Painting to Neighborly. Dwyer Group at the time, Neighborly now. And it was a really successful exit for them. And they had built a really awesome engine for customer experience with this call center and some of the other things that they had bolted onto it over those years. But it was not a part of the acquisition. And so they quickly basically created ProNexis from that point. 0 customers other than 5-Star Painting. They were still 5-Star Painting was their only customer.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yep. And then they quickly tried to change the business model so that they could support, and the technology so they could support multiple companies, and created ProNexis. And it's been a journey the last 8 years. I joined the company 5 years ago, heading up our sales. We were still in figuring it out, kind of getting our ducks in a row as far as the organization goes. But since then, we've continued to scale, continued to grow, and added on multiple offerings that are important in today's customer experience. So today, ProNexis is it's a part of the 5-Star family of brands. It's the unique brand. It's the customer experience brand, whereas all the other brands, Got You Covered, Mosquito Shield, Bath Solutions, the others, they're all franchise brands.
Yeah.
So my seat in ProNexis and in 5-Star is, I'm the president of ProNexis, but I'm also the head of customer experience for 5-Star franchising. So we're trying to solve problems. Even if ProNexis isn't involved, we're trying to solve the customer experience journey all the way through for each and every brand.
Got it. Yeah, that's great context. I remember, we work with Neighborly as well, and we had started working with them right around the time that they had done the 5-Star Painting transaction.
Yeah.
And the first time I met Scott, the founders you mentioned of 5-Star Painting and now 5-Star Franchise Brands was around that transaction. And one of the first conversations I had with him was that he was kind of paving the way, because there weren't many businesses at all at the time. This was probably 2015 or 16, but there weren't many businesses at all, much less franchise businesses, that were trying to solve problems like online scheduling on the website. And 5-Star Painting, had kind of a full-on, you can schedule a consultation right directly on the website. And, we were building out the new websites for 5-Star Painting. So we were doing some integrations, right, with calendars and ProNexis through that. And that was kind of he was really paving the way. Because now we're going to talk about online scheduling and whatnot, but becoming more common, still not as common as I think it needs to be. But I thought that was really, really interesting at the time. That was something that Scott and I talked about. And he had actually told me the story about starting the brand as well and calling all those painting companies, and 25%, only 25% were answering the phone. That's fascinating. Yeah. Unfortunately, still something that we see a lot of today. But so if I understand it, ProNexis, your mission is to transform the customer experience journey in home service businesses through voice, chat, and instant booking. Is that fairly accurate?
Yeah, you nailed it. That's perfect.
Cool. I did a little bit of homework, patting myself on the back. But look, I mean, I think a big part of our customer base here at Scorpion is in franchising, and then also we work with a lot of independents in the home services or residential services space. And we see a lot of that break in process gap, right? Where businesses may spend a lot of money with us marketing and advertising to drive leads, but they're not answering the phones. They're not responding quickly to online inquiries. They're not taking advantage of chat. They don't have an online scheduling component to their website. So what do you guys see in your through the lens of ProNexis as you're working with customers and you're bringing on new customers? Have you done any research on today? Fast forward from when Scott was calling painters and found that only 25% are answering the phone. What's that look like today
Yeah.
in the residential services space, like with
Yeah.
people and how they're answering calls? What are you seeing through the data?
Well, it's fascinating. It definitely has changed in the last 19 years. Obviously, the entire industry has been turned upside down, and we're in a totally different world at this point. But it has even transformed drastically in the last 3 years since COVID.
Yeah.
Right. That drove a lot of consumer demands that have shifted at least ProNexis's offerings and what people are engaging with the brands that we represent, how they're engaging with them, where they're engaging with them. So, for example, historically, let's just talk calls, right? We have a call center that's a part of ProNexis. Inbound, outbound calling. Historically, inbound calling still was the lion's share of the volume. Up until about 3 years ago and some adjustments in the marketing landscape, we're now where 65% of our calls are outbound calls versus incoming calls, incoming inquiries into the brand.
So just to frame that up, just so make sure that we're clear to the audience. When you say inbound calls, that's someone, say, going to your website or going to maybe your Yelp profile or your Google business profile, seeing the phone number for your business and dialing inbound, right, to the business or to a call center if they've got you guys set up to answer their calls. That would be your definition of inbound?
That's right. Yep.
Okay. Whereas outbound would be you maybe got an inquiry through like a digital channel, like a form on your website or a request to quote on Yelp or maybe a thumbtack lead. And you've got to actually pick the phone up and you've got to then pursue the customer to get them to schedule. Is that an outbound call?
That's right. Yeah. Thanks for that explanation.
Okay. So Ben, if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying then is that kind of 3 years ago, pre-COVID, let's call it pre-COVID, that the majority of calls that you were fielding at ProNexis were inbound, right, from the website, from the customer to the business, versus now that percentage is flipped, and now you're doing more outbound calling.
That's right. Yeah, it's almost
Okay.
flipped on its head.
Wow.
The consumers that were going to the Google business profile or your website and actually hitting click to call or dialing the number, that was 2/3 of the call volume.
Yeah.
And it's now just inverted where 2/3 of the calls are the call center having to outbound call to the lead.
Interesting.
And I think that's more of marketing shifts that have occurred. And so the brands, where there is the ability, the brands are going to additional lead sources. So like Home Advisor, Modernize, Thumbtack, these lead aggregators to continue at the growth rate that everybody wants to grow at. And it's more and more competitive. And Google has made changes that people are still getting their hands around and adapting to. It is forcing these brands to be more proactive and go to these other places where it's almost pay to play. And all of that is outbound calling, outbound outreach via text, call, touchless voicemail, all of those things.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was obviously sitting on the marketing side of the fence. One of the things that we've seen, particularly in the last, 12 to 18 months, is that, look, from an advertising perspective, Google has gotten astronomically more expensive, right? When you think about the traditional, Google AdWords, pay-per-click ads, and even the LSA ads, which when LSAs came on the scene, right, they were very, very low relative to PPC, very low cost per lead product. And we've seen both, cost per clicks and LSA ad prices really balloon in the last 12 to 18 months. And yeah, what we see is our customers are coming to us and saying, "Hey, where else can we go spend money to drive
Hmm.
leads into our business that are going to give us a better kind of unit economic on the actual lead cost?" And you mentioned a couple of those other publishers, right? You mentioned Modernize, you mentioned Thumbtack. I would throw Yelp into that category. And what's interesting is that, in years past, a lot of these brands and even small businesses, they kind of look at those, the Home Advisor, Angie, and the Thumbtack as cheap leads, but lower quality than Google.
Right.
And I think their mind is starting to shift a little bit as, hey, it's just so much cheaper that we'll go put in a process or put in a technology that helps us pursue those leads to get more of them to actually turn into customers, because Google is it's just too expensive on its own. So they still spend money at Google, but maybe they take, you know, 30 or 40% of those dollars and they reallocate them to a different lead cost. So you guys, are you seeing that trend kind of play itself out on the customer experience side as well?
Yeah, you're exactly right. You're hitting it on the head. Google's cost per lead has ballooned. In some cases doubled.
Yeah.
The volume, isn't. It's just sucking budgets dry to a large extent, and so they absolutely are having to fragment their approach and go to other sources. The unique thing about ProNexis is we sit inside the family of brands, and so we're tasked with helping solve those problems. We have the ability to pull that lever and really onboard these different lead sources, try a lot of things with the brands. It allows us to get creative.
Yeah.
So through a corporate location, we will try multiple different lead sources, test them out, really track the data all the way through. That is another value that ProNexis serves to the customer. Is if you fragment it and you send everything to the franchisee, you lose that data. You're only getting what was booked.
Yeah.
Really, you're not getting the not converteds or the non-contactable leads. If they didn't even answer the phone or respond to any text or whatever. So we are able to play a lot and do a lot of trial and error testing as we've gone through the last 12 to 18 months. But it's being driven by changes at Google, changes at Meta, and then the need to continue to grow and the need to continue to find lead sources.
Yeah. It's interesting because, again, going back to the customer, the business customer, right? So the franchisee in your case, or even an independent plumbing and HVAC company, again, a lot of them, when we talk to them at least about, hey, we're going to diversify your advertising dollars from Google, and we're going to throw some money into Yelp and Thumbtack, right? Because, you mentioned earlier that, one of the things about ProNexis and Scott is you guys built a lot of your technology. One of the things that's really unique about Scorpion, as that kind of it being kind of lumped into the digital marketing world, is we kind of see ourselves more of like a software tech company than we do an agency. So we're always kind of flirting that line, but we build all of our advertising tech, right, is our stuff, right? So that enables us to go do unique relationships with Yelp and with Thumbtack and with Angie Home Advisor, in addition to Google and Bing. But we started working on these integrations with Thumbtack and Yelp, a year and a half ago. And that's enabled us to kind of, advertise there and then pull all those leads into our platform and build some automation around some automated responses, right? So that we at least can give our customers, buy them some time to pick up the phone and then call back. But one of the things that we always find tricky, and I'm interested in your take on this, is when we talk to customers about, hey, diversify your ad budgets to these other publishers, sometimes there's this immediate resistance, like, those leads aren't very good.
Yeah.
Or, hey, nobody goes to those places. They just go to Google. And my response back is typically, well, hey, if you looked at the Google search results, if you search for plumber near me, or, mosquito treatment service near me, right? Almost always the top organic results are a Yelp link, a Thumbtack link, right? An Angie Home Advisor link, right? Those aggregators still get a lot of great organic visibility because they're such big authorities in those areas.
Yeah, huge.
So I always tell people, hey, you can siphon that traffic, right? From that starts on Google that ends up on Yelp or ends up on Angie or Thumbtack. And you could then take advantage of that traffic, but at 25% the cost of paying for a click on Google or a lead through LSAs. Do you guys see that type of conversation happening with your customers? Is there ever resistance of, don't want to spend money on those third-party publishers.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. Like a local business is competing against multi-billion-dollar budgets, right? And it's extremely competitive in the home services space right now. And it's only going to continue to get, there's a lot of merger and acquisition. There's a lot of consolidation of the industry. Private equity, venture capital has entered the scene, and they all want to grow. They have to grow, and so that's forcing a lot of change in the market. But those like Home Advisor, they're producing tons of leads. Now, to your point, there is a ton of pushback if the owner has to handle it on their own, because I do not think the quality has changed that much. There is still there's still a fair amount of junk, and in those leads that come across through your account, you're still getting those people that just won't answer the phone. And so for a franchisee to go through and call each lead, 5 times, text them, follow a real consistent cadence, they aren't going to do it, first of all, but they also are going to really complain about the quality of the lead as they go through it.
Yeah.
And that was back to the value and why the investment in the build out of ProNexis. It was to remove that pain point from the franchisee, like remove that entirety, also systemize our approach to the lead source, so that with it, speed to lead, right? That's key. We've heard that forever.
Yeah.
Speed to lead, imperative, especially as you get these lead sources that are competitive. Maybe they were sent to 2 or 3 plumbing companies. The first person that talks to that consumer is typically going to get the deal.
Yeah.
Anyway, so speed to lead, our call center is calling them back within seconds. We have KPIs that we're measuring to make sure that is happening. If they answer, great. We walk through the call flow. We get them taken care of. Book it on the calendar, whatever the end result needs to be. Close the sale, whatever that looks like. But if they don't answer, which is often the case, right? It's I don't know off the top of my head, but it's over 50% of the leads do not answer on that first call.
Yeah.
Depending on the lead source. But let's stick with Home Advisor. More than 50% won't answer that first call. That's where the system's going to text them, and we're going to queue up another call 15 minutes later. We're sending an email out simultaneously as well. So you start going through this whole queue action of calls and texts and emails, and over the course of 5 days, we'll reach out to them 11 different times through those multiple channels of communication. If a franchisee had to do that, of course they are going to complain of the quality.
Yeah.
But when all of that's taken off the table and the system is just doing it for them, and the consumer is able to get in touch with a real person when they choose to engage, they respond, they answer the call, whatever it may be, they're talking to somebody. It's not a bot at this point. It's not somebody overseas. It's somebody here in the US that has a fairly accent neutral that they're used to and they want. All of a sudden, those lead sources that would not be viable become really, really valuable.
Yeah.
So, for example, Bath Solutions, one of our brands, they are in the 1-day bath shower conversions, 1-day shower restoration, that sort of industry. When they start a brand new franchisee, we all know SEO takes a long time. Our franchise, it's gonna, we have the master site. We're going to do much better than a standalone company could and get there quicker. However, SEO takes a long time. And so it really, out of the gate, you got to be spending money, generating leads in the pay-to-play market. We have a really, really strong formula where we can turn on these 5 lead sources on day 1. And because of the call center, because it's all through the call center, all of a sudden they're just focused on going in, closing deals in the home, and in doing the installs. They're not having to worry about that customer experience piece of things up in the funnel where that can be outsourced and we can do that for them.
Yeah.
And so it's incredibly valuable to a new franchisee as well as anybody that wants to scale.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just curious, I mean, because you talk about like the importance of the quick follow-up, right? And you drop the nugget of, hey, the first call we call back, over 50% don't answer. So we kind of drop them into this systematic playbook. where we're following up via text message. We're calling again 15 minutes later. What do you see though in terms of like conversion rate, like following up on a lead in the first 10 minutes versus the first hour versus waiting 3 hours before you follow up? Have you guys measured like what the closing percentages are in the different kind of cohorts of time?
Yeah, we absolutely. So we've done quite a bit of data analysis over the last few years with large sets of data, like over millions of calls, and digging into speed to lead specifically. Surprisingly, there's only a little bit of drop off if you were to wait to 10 minutes to call back.
Okay.
It's not like double digit drop off of
Yeah.
conversion rate.
Okay.
But once you get to 15, 25, you start seeing significant drop offs. You told me about your Thumbtack partnership several months ago.
Yeah.
And I just think that's an incredible value to the franchisee and to the brand. The fact that they can go to that partnership and basically get an additional lead source all in the same program. That's incredible. And hats off to Scorpion and you guys for making that partnership so valuable.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Yeah.
But Thumbtack, we work closely with them as well. We were one of the first companies that they ever did an integration with.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah. So, we've worked with them for a long time, integrating so that we can respond on behalf of the brand, on behalf of the franchise owner or the company, so that we're able to take that off their plate as well. But we did a lot of research with our own data as well as they've done a lot of research. And, if you respond on the Thumbtack platform specifically, if you respond within 15 minutes, you have a 61% contact rate.
Wow.
But if you wait to 15 to 30 minutes, it drops by like 18%. It's staggering how quickly you start to lose the ability to touch the consumer. Today's consumer, if you wait till 12 to 24 hours, you're only able to talk to them 38% of the time. They're gone.
Yeah.
They're gone.
Yeah, that's interesting. We going back to, what we obviously don't have or staff a call center at Scorpion, but what we did try to do when we did this integration with Thumbtack, right, is a lead gets submitted through Thumbtack. It comes directly into our customer's Scorpion platform portal, one of our marketing suites, which we call communications. And we immediately fire off a automated response. Hey, thanks so much for contacting X business. We'd love to have a conversation. We'll be following up. By the way, if you'd like to schedule an appointment, here's a link where you can go directly to our website and schedule an appointment, right, directly on our website without waiting for a call back if you want to do that. So, we're trying to at least kind of do some of that automated non-calling. But I mean, look, you got to know that even today, I mean, as a consumer myself, right, if I were to go and submit a lead someplace, even if I don't want to answer the phone, if someone actually takes the time to call me back and leave me a voicemail saying, "Hey, I got your submission through Thumbtack. Love to be able to help you." Like, that's a better experience than not bothering to call me back at all, right? And the quicker somebody does that, the more faith that as a consumer I'm going to have that this person cares about me as a customer, that they're interested in my business, right? And if they're willing to do that before I ever spend any money with them, seems reasonable that they'll deliver good value and they'll be attentive when I actually start giving them money for doing work on my house or whatever I'm calling them to do. So
yeah, working, this Thumbtack, for example, because you've worked with them, I think you've seen this this evolution that they've gone through. At least I've seen it. They used to be all about the consumer, right? We're going to build this whole platform towards the consumer.
Yeah.
So there was a little pushback from the pros in that, like, they don't give me any information and I'm just waiting on them to respond. And it's challenging as a pro to operate and be totally blind to what's going on until they finally decide to give you that information.
Right.
Can't maximize it. So they shifted where the online booking is more and more important than it ever has been. However, not everybody, just like you were saying earlier, not everybody wants to just online book. Some people still want to talk to somebody. Some people just want to text. They don't want to talk on the phone, right? And it's everybody's mission to really meet the consumer where they want to meet you. and be available at the time that they want to meet, talk with you and engage with you. And at ProNexis, that's what we are focused on is deploying tools and capability to enable online booking for those customers that do not want to have to talk to anybody, which is me. I prefer just to go on and book it. I don't have time to have to go through a whole conversation and give them all my information through the phone.
Yeah.
I just want to book it online. But there are some consumers that's how they've always been, and that's how they want to stay. They want to be able to call in, talk to somebody, go through that whole experience. I think for Thumbtack, for Scorpion, for ProNexis, for all our brands, our customers, we have to evolve to meet the consumer where they want to be. And it's almost to the point of it's table stakes to be able to have all of the various capabilities to meet with the customer, whether it's chat, real-time texting back and forth, of course, calls. That is still a massive percentage of the interactions, and then online booking, right? You got to have all of that. Otherwise, you're falling behind. And those customers that have those expectations are going elsewhere. And then you have to do it well. You have to do it well. There's a ton of data around chat. If you offer it on the website, but no one responds or it's a poor experience, huge negative ramifications for your brand, right? It really reflects poorly on the brand as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, you dropped a bunch of nuggets there, and I think it's very consistent with what we're seeing too. I mean, we've launched just this year, what we call our Connect product, which is meant to be layered on the website, but it contains in the Connect product, it contains all the calls to action you just mentioned, right? Click here to call us. Click here if you want us to call you, and you can submit some information, chat with us or text with us. We were about to launch AI chat, which is really interesting. I'd love to get your take on that.
Oh, yeah.
And then schedule directly online, right? And we just drop them into a workflow where they can, tell us what type of service that they want. They can pick a time that's tied into the calendar of the business, and they can schedule the appointment. Curious what you see, because we've seen some really interesting data since we've started pushing online scheduling for service businesses. I mean, first of all, I know it's a fairly new concept, but if I owned a residential service business, I'd be running to get online scheduling on my website.
Yeah.
Because what we see is whenever you have that, right, we see that rather than, typically you see if you've got just a form, like an email form or a call to action, we see like 85% of those leads are calls, 15 or so are form fills. When you put online scheduling on, right, online scheduling jumps to like 25, 30% on the low end of conversions on the low end. And I've seen customers where it's like 50%, right, of their conversions are scheduled. But more so what we see is those scheduled appointments, right? They tend to stick more often, right? Because think about it, the consumer has gone in, told you what they're looking for, picked the time and said, come to my home at this time.
Yeah.
Right. So it kind of makes sense, the psychology of somebody that's booking online, that they're in a ready to buy state. So they stick. And then two, we actually see the average deal size is typically higher on online scheduled appointments than if someone calls or submits a form or chats. I don't know. Do you have any data around those, either the conversion percentages or, what the average ticket sizes are like?
Well, you hit it on the head, right? It on the low end, it's 25% of the total appointments will be through an online booking if they offer it. Scorpion and ProNexis work together to get Gotcha Covered's online booking tool off the ground.
Yeah.
Which was a great team effort there. They're seeing on the low end, right? They're seeing about 25% of their bookings come through that online booking. In the past, they did not have that offering, and I have some data on the case study, what that's done. They've seen a reduction in total cost so not cost of lead generation, but cost of getting that lead to close, because they use the call center, and there's a cost to that, right?
Sure.
The online booking is so cheap. It's SaaS, right? It's very scalable.
Yeah.
Put it on there and it's running. They've seen their overall cost of acquisition of customer go down by 15%.
Wow. Wow.
in
Yeah,
ProNexis
because you're not
dollars.
paying the overhead of having somebody to call the lead back or answer a phone call, right? You're just, hey,
Yeah,
here's the here's the integration, right? It's SaaS. You're
yeah.
going to integrate it into your calendar and customer books, and it's on your calendar, and now you've got an appointment. That makes perfect sense. But 15%, those are real dollars.
Real dollars to the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
And everyone, like, people are agents, call center agents, they're no exception. Everybody is more expensive today than they were 2 years ago. Inflation really got into the salaries and the pay rates. And so 15% right to the bottom line, that's a huge win for these offices. The other piece you said that I want to drill down in is that's on the low end. 25% of deals being booked to the salesman's calendar or to the office's calendar. 25% is on the low end. Bath Solutions, one of our other brands, we've had online booking on there for years. It was, like you said earlier, it was something we invested in very early on in our journey. They have 55% of all of their appointments
Holy
come
cow.
through the online booking tool.
Wow.
And it's touchless, and it's the same thing for Bath Solutions. They use the call center. Everything, calls, leads, all flow through the call center. That is such a cheaper, low cost form of customer acquisition compared to having agents and everything going on that a call center has to provide.
That's fascinating.
And
55% is that's awesome.
it's
That is
huge.
awesome.
It's huge.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just think about the overhead, the amount you save on an overhead, right? On overhead. Just even think about it through the lens of like, let's remove ourselves like Scorpion and ProNexis for a moment and just think about the average SMB, right? That is, they're still in the growth stage. They haven't found a call center solution. Maybe they're even out in the field themselves sometimes as the owner, right? So they're not in
Yeah.
front of their phone, right? If they can enable online scheduling, right? I mean that saves them from having to hire maybe one more, SDR, CDR, whatever you call your customer intake person. Yeah, that's awesome. That's really fascinating. 55%. What a number.
A couple other stats that I wanted to
Yeah.
share as it pertains to our partnership with Gotcha Covered. They saw when we rolled out online booking, they saw an 8% improvement in conversion rate against the pilot group versus the other control group. 8% increase in conversion rate comparatively. And I mean, we're all looking for incremental wins,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
There's not many home runs left in today's market where everybody's really, for the most part, running fairly efficiently. But an 8% increase in conversion rate just by deploying a tool that's also less costly, it's a massive win. It's a massive win.
Yeah.
And then the last stat on this is total number of appointments went up by 5% as well. So they had a higher conversion rate as well as a higher growth rate than what the control group had in the brand.
Yeah, we see that too, right? The more, like you mentioned earlier, like you still got your customers that want to call because that's what they've always done, right? But what we've seen is if the more opportunities for contact or conversion that you enable through channels,
Yeah.
right? The more you drive up your overall conversion percentage because you're enabling people to communicate with you and to contact you in the way that they feel most comfortable. Right. So the more opportunities you're kind of throwing out, the higher the opportunity. And that's an incremental gain, right? If I can, by just putting online scheduling, if I can convert 5% more of my website traffic to an actual lead, again, those are real dollars. So that makes perfect sense. Let me switch to chat for a second, right? So chat's one of those things where, and you mentioned this earlier, it can go really, really well if it's dialed in, right? But if someone is not there to respond to chat, or you get this generic, some of these auto bots that you communicate with, you say, hey, can you help? My thermostat is not working in my house. You're calling an HVAC guy, you're chatting with an HVAC company. Can you help me? And the first response is, hi, yes, we can help. Can I have your name, your first name, and your phone number? It's like, well, you didn't even answer my question about the thermostat. Like, that's so annoying to me. I don't know what it's like for you as a consumer, but I hate that. Like, it's just like that's secondary to having to wait 5 minutes for a response. But when the immediate response is, hey, can I get your name and number so I can hound you and call you and like just close you on the phone?
Yeah.
How do you guys think about that? Like what are some best practices from like a response perspective on chat that you guys see work versus things to kind of avoid or maybe stay away from altogether?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm like you. I prefer texting. I don't want to have to sit on the website. That's
Yeah,
my consumer mindset. However, there still is a fair amount of chat, and and to me, it it still is a part of the total customer experience that a
sure.
brand needs to provide. So we have chat on our brands. We support it with real agents, right? We're in the process of training AI for each brand. It's a fairly heavy lift to train the AI right now. Like it's multiple months of work to train AI right now to support an individual brand. We're in the process of doing that right now, and it's going to help with, of course, the customer experience part of things, but also content creation and all of the things that
Yeah.
marketing needs to be doing for these brands. But as far as currently, it's real people waiting to respond to these chats as they come in. Chat is prone to have a lot of customer inquiries, like current customer interaction,
Yeah.
not as much lead gen. So 90% of our chats, 89% to 91% of them are current customers asking questions as well as inquiries. We book about 10% of the chats to appointments, right? So it's a
Yep.
much lower rate than what you would get out of leads and calls and texting, but it's still significant. It's still important. From a KPI standpoint, I mentioned this earlier. You have to have a good experience, or it's really bad for the brand. It can tick some people off.
Yeah.
So we have a response rate of less than 2 minutes. That they submitted it, they're sitting there. We want to be reactive within a couple minutes, and that's industry, like that's pretty gold standard across the industry. You're balancing cost, you're balancing staffing, but you need to be really reactive to chat because they're sitting on a website waiting for your response. There's tricks and tools to make it so that they're just not sitting there, right? There is um the initial, basically greeting that, hey, we'll be right with you, making sure that they know you're coming, to give you that 2 minute delay. But overall, you have to be quick to respond. You have to be available. And if you aren't going to offer 24/7, turn it off in the nighttime, right? If only enable it when you have staff sitting there waiting to respond to it.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Um, so let's take it up another kind of another layer, talk about maybe one more theme in a little bit of time that we're gonna have left here. This year, it's interesting. I think that the residential services space has been, let's just call a spade a spade. They were kind of one of the beneficiaries of the pandemic, right? Like they were,
Yeah, huge.
fairly recession proof. I would say demand actually increased in most cases. Obviously now this year the economy softened a bit. We're dealing with inflation. Some may say that we're, in a pseudo recession state. Um, what are you guys seeing in the marketplace? Because again, you operate a call center, right? So you're seeing volumes of calls, volumes of leads come in year over year for different customers you support. What's the perspective from from the data you're seeing? Is the consumer marketing softening? Is the market just becoming more competitive? We talked about private equity and venture capital getting in and consolidating, which means some of the bigger businesses are spending more money in marketing. So it kind of makes it harder to compete if you're smaller and you don't have those budgets. But what's your overall kind of feel on the marketplace this year? Because look, candidly, we hear from both our franchise customers and some of our independents, and we see it in the data, right? That it's a combination of it's getting more competitive and the demand is not quite what it was year over year from last year and the previous year. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, similar high level, similar feelings and observations as you just stated. The COVID boom, the COVID, bubble
Yeah,
is on the decline for sure. Year over year, we're still growing. All of our brands are still growing year over year, but same store is not as healthy as we would love it to be. They are definitely feeling the pinch, higher costs, but also I think higher costs all the way down to the consumer is what's driving this.
Yeah.
So less volume of leads, having to get creative about going and finding additional lead sources, um, is really, we've had to kind of scratch and claw our way to get same store growth where we want it to be, and we have a ways to go. We do project the back half of this year is going to continue to be tough. So we're definitely coming off of some interesting policy, stimulus,
Yeah.
free flowing money.
Yeah.
And I think the consumer today is being a little tighter than they were 2 years ago. Um, but the good news is, we're in a really good position to to maximize what is out there.
Yeah.
And a ton of work in the last 3 years to build out the customer experience, to build out the journey, so that we are, maximizing and being able to leverage any leads that we can that come in that they want to do work with 5-star brand companies. And so I think that's a point here. Consumers want to work with companies that have perfected or really nailed the customer experience journey.
Yeah.
And it's a moving target, right? AI is really upsetting the model, and seeing how we can plug that in and what really the consumer likes versus what is just kind of hype.
Sure. Sure. What's adding value to the experience truly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The consumer's going to drive that. They're going to make that decision for us. But a company that has perfected the customer experience is going to win. The competition isn't changing. The guys that are performing the best with customer experience are going to win the consumer and going to be able to weather any downturns or any headwinds that we have.
Yeah, I agree, man. I agree. Man, this has been a great conversation. It's like I said, I called marketing and customer experience kind of Siamese twins at the beginning of this podcast, and I've always believed that. I mean, even from the early days when I was in digital marketing, I saw that the businesses that I worked with personally that were spending money in marketing, but they had really great processes to capture the lead and to follow up on leads and get appointments booked. They always ended up investing more in marketing, right? Like it's the ones that didn't, and then they, unfortunately for companies like us, the finger pointing comes back to us. And my marketing's not working. It's like, well, hang on. I mean, if you answer the phone or you got back to these leads, then maybe you would think differently about your marketing working or not. But and you dropped so many great nuggets today, and I appreciate the time. As a partner and a customer, we really appreciate your business. But I mean, I think overall, you guys are just doing some really, really interesting things that more brands, both franchise and independents, need to be thinking about and maybe even considering. So if you're interested, if you're listening to this, you're interested, go check out ProNexis, connect with Ben Fox on LinkedIn. Obviously, if you're interested in how we can help you drive more leads and help you get more customers through marketing and advertising, check us out at Scorpion. Ben, it's been a pleasure, man. Thanks so much for the time today.
Jamie, thanks. Pleasure as always. Appreciate it, man. Good to see you.
We'll talk soon. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.